You've reached a place few ever touch, the point where there are no maps, no applause, no clear signs of what comes next. Most people stop long before this, seduced by comfort or fear. They want safety more than growth. But you kept walking, even when the path disappeared beneath you. That's what separates you from them. The final gate isn't guarded by monsters. It's guarded by doubt. It tests whether you will turn back when everything feels unfamiliar. Most do. They crave validation, someone to tell them they're doing well. You moved past that. You kept moving when the voices stopped. And that silence, the one that used to scare you, has now become your companion. That's the sign you've crossed the final gate, when solitude starts to feel like alignment, not exile. Reaching this stage feels strange because no one prepares you for it. The early stages of growth are crowded with company. People cheer when you start, envy when you improve, and disappear when you evolve beyond their reach. Now, you walk in a quiet place where most cannot follow. The air feels lighter, but lonelier. That's how you know it's real. You're no longer seeking belonging. You're seeking mastery. The crowd never makes it here because this place demands self-trust. You can't fake confidence at this level. It's either rooted or it collapses. You've crossed a threshold where motivation doesn't come from reward, but from purpose. That's why it feels harder yet cleaner. The world no longer owes you anything, and somehow, that realization sets you free. Psychology calls this transcendence, the shift from needing to prove to simply becoming. You stop asking who's watching. You stop performing. You stop waiting for approval. Your energy redirects inward. This is the moment where true power starts to form. Most people think power is dominance, but it's actually direction. The ability to move forward without needing to be seen. When you reach the final gate, you start building not for validation, but for legacy. You care less about what they say today and more about what survives after you're gone. The mind expands, but the ego dissolves. You begin to understand why so many people fear solitude. Because in it, they have to face who they truly are without the noise to distract them. Crossing the final gate strips illusions. You realize how much of your old life was built on reaction. You responded to opinions, to praise, to gossip, to fear. But here, there's nothing to react to. There's only creation. That's why it feels so raw. You're facing a blank space that forces you to decide what kind of person you'll be when no one is watching. And that question changes everything. The old version of you needed recognition to feel real. The new version creates reality through intention. You are no longer playing the game, you're building the board. It's not glamorous. It's lonely, but it's pure. That's the trade-off for those who cross this far. This stage of life also teaches you to see through masks. The people who once seemed powerful now look fragile. Their energy depends on attention, their worth on applause. You can see the desperation behind their smiles, the exhaustion behind their noise. You used to chase that too. Now you see how hollow it was. True growth makes you allergic to performance. You start valuing stillness over status, depth over display, meaning over movement. It's not that you stop caring. It's that you start caring correctly. The final gate forces you to differentiate between those who build from substance and those who survive off spectacle. That clarity will cost you company, but it will save your soul. Your mind begins to operate differently here. You start observing instead of reacting. You see patterns in human behavior, how people repeat pain, defend comfort, sabotage peace. You start noticing how their words often come from fear, not truth. That awareness makes you quieter, but more dangerous. Because now, you can predict what others will do without being pulled into their chaos. This is where emotional intelligence becomes your shield. You no longer fight with anger, you disarm with composure. And that composure unsettles people. They feel your control and mistake it for arrogance, when in reality, it's evolution. You've crossed the gate that separates reactors from creators. At this level, your relationship with time changes. You stop rushing. You realize that speed was never the point. Clarity was. You stop chasing deadlines made by others and start setting rhythms that align with your flow. This is not laziness, it's precision. The world glorifies chaos because chaos looks like motion. But when you reach the final gate, you start valuing peace as progress. You understand that the quietest days are often the most productive because they refine thought before action. That's how people who move slowly still end up ahead, They think deeply before they strike. You've learned that lesson through pain. Now it's becoming wisdom. People around you won't understand this transformation. They'll call you distant, detached, or cold. But distance is not indifference. It's discernment. You've stopped explaining your path to those who have no intention of walking it. They thrive on validation. You thrive on purpose. That difference offends them. They'll test your calm, provoke your silence, try to drag you back into noise. Don't fall for it. The moment you start explaining your evolution, you start diluting it. The ones who need to understand never will, and the ones who do will never need words. You've crossed into a frequency that only those built for truth can feel. The deeper you walk beyond the final gate, the more you understand that life rewards endurance, not perfection. The people who appear flawless often fall apart first because they never built the muscles to withstand failure. You've stumbled blood and kept moving. That's why you're still here. Each mistake refined your instinct. Each rejection hardened your purpose. You didn't win by force. You won by outlasting. And that is what separates survivors from legends. The final gate does not test strength. It tests stamina. Anyone can shine for a season, but very few can glow through storms. You are one of them. Reality doesn't pick sides. It doesn't bend for tears, promises, or prayers. It doesn't care who meant well or who had good intentions. It rewards precision, discipline, and truth. That's what makes it terrifying for those who live on illusion. You've probably seen people lie to themselves for years, pretending effort equals progress, or that victimhood guarantees mercy. But reality remains silent through all that noise. It observes, it measures. Then, one day, it delivers the exact outcome that was earned, not the one that was wished for. That's why some people call life unfair. What they mean is that reality refused to protect their ego. It doesn't play favorites. It only mirrors what you feed it. The dangerous thing about reality is that it treats everyone equally. You could be innocent or guilty, rich or poor, kind or cruel. It doesn't matter. If you plant poison, you will harvest pain. If you plant discipline, you will harvest peace. That is the law. People who can't face this truth try to rewrite it through excuses. They call themselves unlucky. They blame timing. They even blame others for their own patterns. But reality doesn't negotiate with delusion. You can fool people. You can fool yourself, but you can never fool the system that governs consequence. That's what separates the wise from the naïve. The wise learn early that fairness doesn't mean comfort. It means consistency. You've seen this play out in relationships, in careers, in friendships. They cry betrayal after ignoring red flags. They scream failure after years of comfort. They call it fate when it was simply cause and effect. Reality has no sympathy for those who ignore its signals. It sends warnings before it sends collapse. The missed deadlines, the uneasy gut feelings, the tension in the room. Those are not coincidences. They are feedback. But people choose blindness because accountability is harder than fantasy. You, however, started listening. You stopped asking reality to pity you and started aligning with it instead. That's when power began to shift in your favor. Psychology calls it cognitive dissonance, the discomfort that comes when truth doesn't match your story. Most people solve it by altering the story, not the behavior. They'd rather bend reality in their minds than bend their ego in practice. But reality cannot be rewritten through thought. It requires action. That's why it breaks people who lie to themselves for too long. Sooner or later, the truth they ignored arrives like a storm, wiping away everything false. You survived this because you stopped defending illusions. You started working with reality instead of fighting it. That's the secret few ever learn. Acceptance isn't surrender, it's strategy. Reality's neutrality is what makes it sacred. It gives everyone a chance to rebuild, no matter how far they've fallen. The same system that punished your carelessness will reward your precision. The same silence that watched you fail will watch you rise. It doesn't hold grudges. It simply records patterns. That's why the guilty can rebuild and the victim can stay stuck. Reality does not owe loyalty. It only mirrors momentum. Once you realize this, you stop waiting for justice from others and start creating balance through your own consistency. That's how you reclaim control in a world that feels rigid. You stop asking for sides and start respecting the laws that govern outcome. Those who misunderstand this principle fall into chaos. They pick emotional sides, thinking righteousness will protect them from consequence. But the world doesn't work like that. You can have good motives and still fail if your methods are flawed. You can be wronged and still fall apart if you choose bitterness over growth. Reality doesn't adjust itself to your morality. It adjusts itself to your movement. It watches what you do, not what you feel. That's why emotionally intelligent people often rise higher than the loudest victims. They understand that being right doesn't matter if your actions don't align with truth. You learned that through pain, and now you see why neutrality is the ultimate justice. People hate this truth because it kills entitlement. They want a version of reality that sympathizes, that bends rules for their narrative. But that version doesn't exist. The universe operates through order, not opinion. The ones who thrive are not the loudest or the luckiest. They are the most aligned. You can pray, wish, and scream, but nothing replaces doing what needs to be done. Once you grasp that, you become unstoppable. Because while others argue over fairness, you're quietly shaping outcomes. That's what terrifies them. They can't compete with someone who works with reality instead of begging it for favors. At this level, your emotional balance becomes your advantage. You no longer take losses personally. You understand that every failure is data, every delay a correction. You stop blaming others because blame distracts from calibration. You see through the illusion of good and bad luck. Everything is feedback, and feedback is gold. That's why calm people seem powerful. They're not detached, they're observant. They don't panic when things fall apart. They simply adjust. Because they know reality always rewards alignment. The world starts looking less like chaos and more like code. Once you start reading that code, no manipulation can reach you. They will call you cold for thinking this way. They will say you lack empathy because you no longer react like they do. But detachment is not cruelty, it's clarity. You see life as it is, not as you wish it to be. That's what makes you effective while others drown in emotion. Reality doesn't pick sides, and neither do you anymore. You work with what's in front of you, not what's fair. You stopped begging for outcomes and started earning them. That shift is what separates survivors from dreamers. You've crossed from illusion into awareness, and that transition is permanent. They will poke at you, not because they hate you, but because they need to test your balance. They want to see if the calm you project is real, or just an act waiting to crack. People fear what they can't control, and when you stop reacting, they lose their grip. So they provoke you. Small comments, subtle jabs, backhanded compliments. They want to disturb your stillness. They think if they can make you flinch, they've won. But the truth is, when you no longer move on command, you terrify them. Your stillness exposes their chaos. Your restraint reflects their lack of control. That's why they poke, not to hurt you, but to confirm that you're still human enough to play their games. You will notice how predictable they become once you stop responding. They will escalate slowly. At first, it's light sarcasm disguised as humor. Then it's passive aggression wrapped in concern. When that fails, they'll shift to outright disrespect. They want to draw you into their emotional theater, where they can label your reactions as proof of guilt. This is how manipulators regain footing. They can't win on truth, so they bait you into anger. That's why your composure is so powerful. Every time you refuse to engage, they rot a little more inside. They realize they're irrelevant to your emotional climate, and that realization eats them alive. Psychology calls this emotional projection. They can't regulate themselves, so they try to transfer chaos into you. Their words are not attacks, they're confessions. When they accuse you of arrogance, it's because your confidence highlights their insecurity. When they call you cold, it's because your control reminds them of their volatility. When they say you've changed, it's because your evolution exposes their stagnation. Every poke is an attempt to make you step back into a version of yourself that kept them comfortable. But you've outgrown that version. You no longer speak the language of insecurity, and they don't know how to communicate without it. The moment you rise above their games, you'll notice the silence. It's not peace at first, it's tension. They gather, whisper, conspire, because your detachment embarrasses them. You've become a mirror showing them who they are when they no longer have power over you. That's why they double down. They poke harder, trying to regain the response that used to feed them. You have to understand, People who survive on controlled panic when their target evolves. They depend on your reactions to validate their identity. When that supply ends, they implode. Your indifference becomes the quietest form of revenge imaginable. In everyday life, this happens everywhere. At work, in relationships, even among family. Someone will see your peace as a threat. They'll accuse you of being distant when you're just focused. They'll call you emotionless when you're just disciplined. They'll say you think you're better when you're simply uninterested in dysfunction. Let them talk. The ones who poke are the ones most disturbed by their reflection in you. They see your stability and feel their own imbalance. They see your self-control and remember every time they lost theirs. You don't need to explain yourself. Your consistency will expose everything they're trying to hide. There will be moments when the temptation to react feels heavy. You'll want to prove your innocence, to defend your name, to strike back. But reacting means stepping into their arena, and that's where they win. Their chaos thrives on engagement. If you step back instead of stepping forward, you drain their fuel. Silence, when used correctly, becomes a strategy, not a weakness. They will interpret your stillness as fear, but it's calculation. You're letting them overextend, letting their own emotions betray them. They'll call you heartless while they self-destruct. That's when you'll understand why restraint is stronger than rage. The truth is, they don't actually want your destruction. They want your reaction because it gives them a sense of importance. You were once their emotional center, and now you've taken that power back. That's why they keep poking. They're trying to wake the old you, the one who lived to explain, who feared misunderstanding, who needed closure. That person is gone. The new you doesn't chase clarity. You create it by existing. Your peace offends those who relied on your chaos. You're not cold, you're healed. And healed people are mirrors that hurt those still bleeding. Eventually, they'll tire themselves out. You'll notice their energy shift from attack to avoidance. They'll start saying things like, "You've changed," or "You think you're too good for us?" That's their surrender. They can't feed on what doesn't respond. What they'll never admit is that they admire you now. Deep down, they wish they could control themselves like you do. They envy your calm because it represents freedom they don't have. You've proven that control is power, and power without noise terrifies the powerless. They'll call you heartless, but that's the cost of elevation. You stop entertaining anything that drains you. You might think you've lost something along the way. Connection, warmth, belonging. But what you've really done is refine the energy you allow around you. The ones who stay will match your frequency. They won't poke, they'll understand. They'll speak peace, not provoke pain. The others will fall away because they can't survive where truth lives. Growth is a filter. The higher you climb, the quieter it becomes, because people who need chaos to feel alive can't breathe at your altitude. They will call it arrogance, but it's actually awareness. You've simply stopped mistaking noise for love. Let them grow so arrogant that they forget how fragile they are. Arrogance blinds faster than any lie. It whispers that they are untouchable, that their actions carry no weight, that their victories are permanent. You don't need to argue with people like that. You just need to wait. Time does the work arrogance refuses to do. It exposes, it humbles. It rearranges the hierarchy of power. When you meet someone who is too loud, too proud, too certain of their control over you, step aside. Let them speak, let them mock, let them underestimate. Their ego will stretch so far it snaps under its own pressure. That's how arrogance ends, not through confrontation, but through collapse. You've probably seen it before. Someone rises fast and starts mistaking attention for loyalty. They think admiration means immunity. They walk with the air of someone chosen, special, beyond reproach. And while they flaunt their supposed superiority, they stop growing. That's the quiet tragedy of arrogance. It freezes development. The moment they believe they've won, they stop learning. They think the rules no longer apply to them. Meanwhile, you're still learning, still adapting, still sharpening in silence. They look higher, but you're building deeper. And when storms come, it's not the loud ones who survive. It's the ones with roots that don't need to be seen. Psychology defines arrogance as overcompensation for insecurity. The louder they brag, the more fragile they are inside. But don't expose that weakness too soon. Let them inflate. Let them build the illusion of dominance so tall that their fall becomes public. The ego needs height before gravity can humble it. Their arrogance will make them sloppy. They'll skip preparation, ignore detail, dismiss warning signs. All because they think they're above consequence. That's your opening. You don't need revenge when arrogance is already setting the trap. Their downfall is self-inflicted. It just takes patience to watch it unfold. There's a quiet satisfaction in letting someone write their own ending. When you stop chasing fairness and start trusting timing, you discover that arrogance burns itself out. People who can't listen destroy themselves through repetition. They make the same mistake again and again, believing every failure is someone else's fault. That blindness is what destroys them. You just have to wait for the loop to close. Every arrogant person has a breaking point, the moment where they realize the world they built on control no longer obeys them. By then, it's too late to rebuild. You don't need to lift a finger. Just let them grow. In every field, relationships, business, friendship, you'll encounter people who mistake calmness for weakness. They think they're winning because you stopped reacting. Let them. Arrogance thrives in silence until it becomes self-sabotage. The longer they gloat, the more they expose their cracks. Confidence moves quietly, arrogance performs. You can always tell the difference because confidence builds while arrogance consumes. They feed off validation, so when the crowd stops clapping, they collapse. You don't need to expose them publicly. Their need for an audience ensures their destruction. Let them keep performing. The stage will cave in soon enough. There's also something powerful about restraint. When you refuse to correct their arrogance, you give them the rope to hang their own illusion. They mistake your silence for submission, but it's calculation. They believe they're controlling the narrative, but really, they're narrating their downfall. The more they talk, the more truth leaks through. The more they boast, the clearer their desperation becomes. That's why quiet people are feared. They don't compete in noise. They compete in outcome. And outcomes never lie. When arrogance meets results, truth always wins. So stay silent, keep building, and let them grow comfortable in their delusion. At some point, they'll notice the shift. Their arrogance will begin to isolate them. The same people who once flattered them will grow distant. The charm fades, the power weakens, and they'll look around wondering why the room feels colder. Arrogance pushes people away because it feeds on superiority, and superiority cannot coexist with connection. They will call it betrayal, but it's just consequence. They forgot that people follow humility, not pride. And by the time they realize it's too late, the damage is done. You don't need to gloat. Watching them face themselves is victory enough. It's important to remember that arrogance cannot survive reflection. The moment they look inward, it dies. That's why arrogant people avoid silence. They fill every gap with noise, because stillness forces self-awareness. You, however, mastered silence. That's why you became dangerous to them. You don't need to prove anything. Your patience threatens them more than your words ever could. Let them talk, let them boast, let them drown in their own noise. When the silence returns, only truth remains, and that's where your strength lies. Arrogance fades where awareness thrives. You'll reach a point where you no longer feel anger toward them. Pity, maybe, but not hate, because you'll see the pattern now. How arrogance is just fear dressed in confidence. They need the illusion of control, because without it, they fall apart. You've outgrown that illusion. You've learned that power is quiet, that real strength doesn't need validation. So when they laugh at you, stay calm. When they mock you, stay grounded. Let them grow so arrogant that they mistake their comfort for safety, because comfort blinds faster than arrogance itself. And the moment they stop questioning, they've already lost.